Hey folks, it's Pheelan over here. Monday morning, happy Monday everyone. I thought I would piggyback on my podcast that I did last week about the timing of the millennium, just to talk a little bit about the dating of the book of Revelation. You know, there are a lot of theories out there that, everybody's got their particular theory about the book of Revelation, and a lot of literary theories out there as well, on which the interpretation of the book depends. Now, I don't think it's very wise to bring a literary theory to the table and then to make the interpretation dependent upon that theory. I think what we need to do is see what the book says about itself, and then if we can get a theory from that, then that's great. But I don't think that we should come at the book with our predetermined theories. Anyhow, there was a belief in the first century, and it was a belief that was prevalent after Nero's decease. It's called the Nero Redivivus view. And the view teaches that Nero was dead, but that he would return. And of course, there's a variation of that, a view that Nero was actually in hiding and he would return. So you'll see, if you read some old preterist commentaries, even some newer preterist commentaries, you'll see that Nero Redivivus view more or less expounded. You know, either the interpreter will say that Nero was dead and that John thought he was going to return, or that Nero was in hiding and John thought that he was going to return. The first full preterist commentary on the book of Revelation was written by a guy named P.S. Desprez, and I believe it was the 1850s. He actually quoted 332 and 333 of his book. He actually quoted several ancient writers, one of whom was Sulpicius Severus, an ecclesiastical writer of the 3rd century, who wrote, quote, "It is uncertain whether he, Nero, destroyed himself, whence it is believed that although he may have pierced himself with a sword, he was saved by the cure of his wound in accordance with that which is written, and his deadly wound was healed. At the close of the age he is to be sent again, that he may exercise the mystery of iniquity." Now, I believe that Revelation was written after Nero's decease. And as a matter of fact, if you go to, say, Revelation chapter 17, where you get the timeline of emperors, 5 are fallen and 1 is, the other has not yet come. I think it's really important to get that timeline right, because if you get the timeline right, there's going to be a lot of verses that harmonize with each other and they make sense. If you get the timeline wrong, nothing's going to make sense. So I think it's important that we actually be historical and that we be accurate with the facts and the data, and that we start that timeline with the Emperor Octavian Augustus, not with Julius Caesar, because Julius Caesar was never a king. It doesn't matter who said he was a king. It doesn't matter what kind of royal honorifics were bestowed on him after his decease. We don't want to call him a king because he never was a king. Even William Shakespeare, when he was researching material for his tragedy, Julius Caesar, I believe the early part of the 16th century, he researched, of course, he used Plutarch as his source. I believe it was a Norse translation of Plutarch. And even he made sure that he didn't call Caesar a king. He was very accurate in saying, well, he was loath to lay his hands off the crown, but he never actually accepted it. So we don't want to go and say, we don't want to rank Julius Caesar as one of the kings, because he never actually accepted the crown. He was a dictator. Starting the timeline, however, with Augustus, we got Augustus, then Tiberius, right, that's number 2, then I believe it was Caligula came after him, and then Claudius, then Nero. 5 are fallen, right? So Nero was already dead. He had already received his deadly sword wound. 1 is, so that would be Galba, right? And Galba only reigned for a short few months, I believe, from June of AD 68 to January of AD 69. So the book of Revelation had to have been written during that time frame. And then the other has not yet come. That would have been Otho. Now, my theory, and I've got a theory, was that if Nero was to rise from the dead, he would have defeated Galba, Otho, and possibly Titus as well. Maybe not Titus, but at least Galba and Otho. But I'm not going to go as far as to expound my theory. But I also have a view that Nero was about to rise from the abyss, that he was already dead. If Nero had already received his deadly sword wound, but he was about to rise, he was of the 7, but he would also be the 8th of the 7. So 8 is a number of resurrection. So John was thinking that Nero, he knew that Nero was dead, but he was thinking that Nero was going to rise from the dead. Didn't necessarily have to be a physical resurrection. Could have been a representative sort of resurrection. We don't know. All we know is that he felt that Nero was going to rise from the dead. Now, I really believe that this is why it's important to date Revelation based on the internal evidence. The internal evidence, of course, being that the book was written after Nero's decease.
Important stuff, folks.
Is that John thought that Nero was going to rise from the dead, and that would have triggered the Great Tribulation and all that. Now, one thing that was necessary to trigger the eschaton, and that was the sealing of the 144,000. That was the first fruits of national repentance. We remember that Christ in Matthew chapter 23, verse 39, you will not see me until you say, blessed is he that cometh in the name of the Lord. In other words, national repentance was necessary to the parousia taking place. So one of my views, which I think is pretty interesting, well, to me it's interesting because it allows me to really go over the whole scope and breadth of divine revelation and see the correspondence and facts and details, that 144,000 was necessary to triggering the eschaton. Now, that number was being worked on during the first century. In fact, during the Acts period, we see that the Jews were being saved, that they were being converted, but that number never really reached fruition. So it was on the verge of taking place. You had the sign of the prophet Jonas, which set the timeline to a 40-year period, and it was right at the end of that 40 years that things were really coming to a crisis. Everything was going to take place soon. Christ was at the door, all of that. But that 144,000 number, that number wasn't sealed up yet. So that was what needed to take place in order for the harvest to occur. We see the harvest in Revelation chapter 14. Those 144,000 are in heaven, so they'd already been caught up. But the number never materialized. So we're assuming that fulfillment was pushed off into the future, at least postponed. But I don't want to go too deeply into that. I want to talk mainly about the timing. Timing being based on a view which John considered probably as his own, as well as that of the whole Roman Empire at the time, the Nero Redivivus view, that Nero was either dead or in hiding. He was going to
come back.
This fixes it. This fixes the dating to a period post Nero's demise. So that's pretty much what I had for today, and we can get deeper into it as we go along, but I figured that would be a nice little tidbit to follow up on my last, one of my last podcasts in respect to the timing of the millennium. So we want to make sure we get that timeline right. There's a lot of folks that start the timeline with Julius Caesar, and of course they have to do that because if they started the timeline with Augustus, there wouldn't be any time for any of those eschatological prophecies to be fulfilled. You need at least 42 months. So Nero died in June of 68, so that doesn't leave 42 months until Christ allegedly returned in AD 70. You need to push that timeline back far enough so that you can have those things take place. Of course, it just doesn't work any other way, so they have to start the timeline with Julius Caesar. But that's not historically accurate. It's not even prophetically accurate. And we'll get into that in another podcast, but that's all I have for this morning. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks for your subscriptions. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your thoughts and observations. Have a great, great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.